further to the left. Plus, those deadly wildfires raging in California, spurring a fierce political debate over who or what is to blame for the rise in so-called mega fires. Our experts will debate. Hello and welcome to Fox News at Night. I'm Shannon Bream in Washington. President Trump is eyeing a staff shakeup. He says 3 or 4 or 5 cabinet positions are up for grabs. Plus, he wants his Homeland Security Chief, Kirstjen Nielsen, to be, in his words, much tougher. Well, Trace Gallagher's following the latest moves by Nielsen's agency aimed at the caravan along our southern border. Good evening, Trace.
Good evening, Shannon. 6,000 Central American migrants are already in Tijuana, and a stadium being used for shelter looks like a refugee camp. The Mexican government says it does not have the resources to house these migrants long term, but with 6,000 already here and 7,000 to 8,000 more coming, the application process for U.S. asylum could take up to a year. And while Mexico has laid out the welcome mat for most of the migrants' journey, that appears to have ended in Tijuana, where tempers are hot and patience is thin. Watch.
Tell you that 95% of all the residents of Tijuana are very concerned. They're very afraid of what could happen. There's no control of the crowd.
Meantime, fearing that a large group of migrants would rush the border today, for the first time, the Department of Homeland Security shut down the San Ysidro port of entry near San Diego for several hours. That's the busiest checkpoint between the U.S. and Mexico, with more than 40,000 vehicles and 100,000 people crossing every day. And with miles of new razor wire enforcement and a full contingent of Border Patrol officers and military troops, getting into the U.S. won't be easy. We should note the San Ysidro shutdown came less than a day after Fox News Sunday aired its interview with President Trump, where he called for DHS Secretary Kirstjen Nielsen to get tougher. Watch.
Are you happy with Kirstjen Nielsen at DHS?
Well, I like her a lot. I respect her a lot. She's very smart. I want her to get much tougher, and we'll see what happens there. But I want to be extremely tough.
Today, during a conference call with reporters, DHS also said most of the caravan members are not women and children. Instead, they are single adult or teenage males who place women and children at the front of the line to gain sympathetic news coverage. DHS also says it has identified more than 500 criminals traveling with the caravans. Finally, the general overseeing the deployment of 5,800 U.S. military members to the border says some of those troops could start coming home as soon as this week. Shannon.
All right, Trace Gallagher, thank you very much. All right, tonight, new backlash to those thousands of Central American migrants, and it's not coming from the Trump administration. It's actually coming from Mexicans who say they are worried about the growing burden on their economy. National correspondent William Lajeunesse is in Tijuana with details.
Tension in Tijuana.
We are here because our government has not taken control of these, what we call invasions.
Shouting, "Hondurans go home" and "Viva Mexico," riot police Sunday stopped hundreds of Mexicans trying to storm the migrant shelter.
You see people, within the migrant caravan smoking weed, drinking, throwing rocks at the cops, causing chaos.
These Mexicans oppose illegal immigration and blame officials for allowing in thousands without papers. They fear crime, a loss of jobs, depressed wages, in a country where 40% already live in poverty.
I'm not really in favor of them coming the way they did. You know, to me, it feels like they invaded.
Nearby, a counter-protest. Supporters say Mexico should welcome and protect immigrants.
It's important that we consider that our Mexican brothers are also in the same situation.
The shelter Sunday remained on lockdown till protesters went home.
We are here for work, to have a better life, and no trouble, not troublemakers.
More than 6,000 caravan migrants arrived in Tijuana, their shelter looking now like a refugee camp, as many realize they cannot easily cross the border, and any asylum interview is at least 5 weeks away.
I tell them it's better for you to get a job and start working right, and then get out of your head
trying to cross the border.
This morning, for the first time, the U.S. shut down the San Ysidro port of entry. Secretary Kirstjen Nielsen saying in a tweet, CBP believed a, quote, large number of caravan migrants plan to rush the border to gain illegal access to the U.S.
So by shutting down lanes and slowing traffic and increasing wait times, President Trump is also sending a message to Mexico City, saying if you don't stop these caravans on your southern border, you may face consequences on the northern one. And he's doing it in a language that everyone understands. Time is money. Shannon?
William Longinus, thank you very much. Well, Tijuana's mayor says the city is not prepared to handle a, quote, avalanche of arrivals. During a protest against the migrants, a local Mexican carpenter shouting, this is an invasion. According to the Los Angeles Times, he also shouted, we demand respect. We demand that our laws be followed. Sounds familiar. Let's bring in the former Homeland Security spokesperson under President Obama, Marcia Catron, and the executive director of the Federation for American Immigration Reform, Bob Dane. Welcome to you both. Great to have you with us. Okay, so this problem is not getting any better based on all the conversations that we've had. Thousands now. There were told 6,000 at this one processing area waiting, and a number of the migrants sound surprised that this could be months for them, Bob. Are they being misinformed on their way to the border?
They are being misinformed. They're being manipulated and exploited, and all of us are as well. I mean, there's a certain irony to all of this. The fact that because Mexico has not enforced its southern border, they've got caravans and chaos throughout the country now, throughout all of Mexico, and a concentration of it in Tijuana. And now you've got the Tijuana mayor who doesn't think much of this, and you can't blame him, because even on the best of days, Tijuana is a pretty tough town with limited resources. Now he's dealing with thousands of migrants, probably 10,000 more on the way. The point of all of this is that secure borders and regulated immigration, it's not just an American idea, it's a worldwide standard, and it works. And I think Mexico itself is now waking up to that.
Yeah, and we're hearing from people, as you heard there, Marcia, from inside Mexico, who are now worried about the impact on their wages, their jobs. Another person, a demonstrator against the migrants today, a Mexican woman herself, saying this. NPR had the headline shouting, Mexico first, hundreds in Tijuana march against migrant caravan. She says, quote, we work hard here. We don't get handouts. The government shouldn't be giving things to migrants when plenty of Mexicans are in a difficult position. It sounds like the same feedback and arguments that we often hear within our own borders here in the U.S.
Well, with 1.5 million people there, it's no surprise you're going to see a few protesters here and there. And these people that are coming through in the caravan they're sandwiched in this corridor between these two countries. So they're in between a rock and a hard place. And I think there may be a sense from the citizens there that they're getting something from the Mexican government that the citizens themselves aren't, which is, you know, it's a shame that the administration's making this harder than it could be. They could be helping the situation instead of making it tougher for these people.
Meaning the Mexican administration or the U.S.?
The U.S. administration could be making things a lot easier if this was a real, you know, problem. And instead of shutting down lanes, they could actually be sending asylum officers down there to interview these folks.
They say that they're doing as much as they can, that they're processing people as quickly as they can, but there's a bottleneck there, and that's just, unfortunately, it seems to be the situation right now. I want to mention, too, the ACLU has been suing against the president's new asylum plan, which is people have to go to ports of entry. If they try to enter illegally and ask for asylum, he's not going to allow it. So in this lawsuit challenging that, the ACLU says many refugees lack significant formal education. They're unaware that there are designated locations for crossing into the U.S. Even those refugees who know that designated ports of arrival exist often have no idea where they are or how to find them.
Well,
what do we do
just
with
leave
that?
it to the ACLU to create more chaos on top of more chaos. Look, these folks, for better or for worse, they're not even yet on U.S. soil. They don't have a claim, and they have no standing. Look, you know, if we're going to believe that a country has a finite inability to allow in a finite number of people into the country, what's at stake here is we either have a say in who comes into the country under what terms and conditions. We have an ability to analyze their potential value to the country and examine their background, or we just rubber stamp everyone who comes a knocking on our door by whatever means they have gotten up here. That's what is at stake with this caravan, and unless we secure the border, tighten the credible fear requirements, and close the loopholes, we will continue to have caravan after
there's
caravan.
a lot to be done in a bipartisan fashion, I might add. Marcia, quickly to you, want to get your response to this new Monmouth University poll shows a majority of Americans, 53%, do believe the caravan creates some kind of threat for the country.
Well, if they do, the Border Patrol will stop them at the border. That's what they're there for, right? And they have biometric capabilities to check all of these individuals before they come into the country. And then actually a very small percentage actually do get asylum. The majority are sent back to their home countries.
All right, Marcia and Bob, great to see both of you tonight. We will continue the conversation. Thank you both. All right, there are some new rules, by the way, for White House press conferences as a result of the legal showdown the administration's been having with CNN over reporter Jim Acosta. Correspondent Kristen Fisher is here with more details. Kristen, hello.
Hey, Shannon. Well, the White House unveiled these new rules at the same time it announced it would restore CNN's chief White House correspondent Jim Acosta's hard pass after CNN had sued. Now, a hard pass is the credential that gives all members of the White House press corps access to the White House. And now the White House is threatening to suspend or revoke any journalist's hard pass if they break one of these new rules.
That's enough.
Pardon me, ma'am. Mr.
President, that's enough.
From here on out, at all press conferences, the White House says journalists will only be allowed to ask one question, unless the president or whatever official taking questions allows them to ask a follow-up question. After that, the White House says the journalist must yield the floor, which includes physically surrendering the microphone to White House staff. No surprise, the White House Correspondents Association is already pushing back by saying, quote, for as long as there have been White House press conferences, White House reporters have asked follow-up questions. We fully expect this tradition will continue. If there had been a press conference today, many of the questions would have undoubtedly centered around something President Trump said to Fox's Chris Wallace on Sunday. His declaration that he would not interfere if his interim Attorney General, Matt Whitaker, who is an outspoken critic of the special counsel's probe, decides to rein in the Robert Mueller investigation.
It's going to be up to him. I think he's very well aware politically. I think he's astute politically. He's a very smart person. A very respected person. He's going to do what's right. I really believe he's going to do what's right.
But you won't overrule him if he decides to curtail.
I would not get involved.
That has some Democrats, like Senator Richard Blumenthal, so worried that this could be the beginning of the end of the Mueller probe that they filed a lawsuit to try to remove Whitaker.
What's at stake here is not just Matt Whitaker, but all of the decisions of the Department of Justice, the special counsel investigation. He's shown himself to be hostile to that investigation. He's provided a blueprint for strangling and stifling it.
Yes.
And the stakes here are very high.
But for now, the probe continues. President Trump says he's completed his written answers and will be submitting them to the special counsel's office very soon.
The questions were asked and answered. It wasn't a big deal. You know, they make it like I had meetings for many, many hours. I got the questions. I responded. We wrote them out. I read them once. I read them a second time. We made some changes. That's it.
So he's agreed to answer questions on paper, but not in person. After months of negotiations, President Trump said yesterday that he probably will not agree to a face-to-face interview with Mueller and his team, Shannon.
Kristen Fisher, thank you. All right, longtime Democratic leader Nancy Pelosi is facing a tough new challenge tonight as her supporters cry, sexism. Is it a valid critique or just a smoke who they are and why they're being disparaged as #5whiteguys on social media? Well, correspondent Kristen Fisher is back doing a double header tonight to tell us about the latest hurdle for Pelosi trying to get back to the top of the House.
That's right. You know, it's the miracle of TV magic, right,
Yeah,
Shannon?
we like
I'm
it.
back.
More Kristen is always a good thing.
So here's the deal. This letter, it certainly threatens Pelosi's bid to become the next House Speaker, but she still has no clear challenger. Not one of the 16 current or incoming House Democrats that signed the letter said that they'd run against her. Well, today they thanked her for her years of service, but they said that, quote, our majority came on the backs of candidates who said that they would support new leadership because voters in hard-won districts and across the country want to see real change in Washington. We promised to change the status quo, and we intend to deliver on that promise. Now, here's one of the Democrats who signed that letter, Congressman Seth Moulton of Massachusetts.
If we answer that call for new leadership by reinstalling the same status quo establishment leadership that we've had in this party since 2006, then we're letting down the American people.
Now, of the 16 Democrats who signed the letter against Pelosi, all but 2 are men. So this is really becoming a battle between a small group of mostly moderate male lawmakers against the more liberal and diverse wing of the party. And it's a point one of the more high-profile members of the incoming House class drilled into tonight.
And when you actually look at the signatories, it is not necessarily reflective of the diversity of the party. My main concern was that there is no vision, there is no common value, there is no goal that is really articulated in this letter aside from we need to change.
So in terms of timing, a preliminary vote on the speakership is set for next week, but a final vote won't happen until after the new Congress is sworn in January. So House Democrats are likely going to be exerting a lot of energy on this internal leadership fight instead of spending the next 6 weeks solely focused on their upcoming legislative agenda. Shannon, no matter who wins, it's going to be a big distraction.
Yeah, and I know they think it could take a lot of wind out of their sails for the other things they want to try to get done. We'll see. Kristen, thank you.
Thanks, Shannon.
Okay, buckle up. According to the online elections monitoring site Ballotpedia, there are at least 55 Democrats, check out some of their names here, who could credibly run for president. The New York Times says it's the earliest start to the presidential jockeying they've seen, and it's paving the way for what's expected to be the longest, most expensive, and most crowded field in history. Time now for tonight's Power Panel. Fox News contributors Jessica Tarlov and Mark Thiessen, and White House correspondent for the Daily Caller, Sagar and Jetty. Welcome to all of you.
Good to be with you, Shannon.
Hey, Shannon. Okay, so a very crowded field. So let's look at the top 5 according to this recent CNN poll about who is in the mix. Former Vice President Biden at the top with 33%. These are people asked, which Democrats would you support? Senator Bernie Sanders, Senator Kamala Harris, Senator Warren, Senator Booker. They're all in the mix. Mark, who do you think breaks out from the pack, and why are we already talking about this?
We don't even know the results of the midterms yet, for sure.
No, those aren't even settled.
Well, first of all, I mean, I thought we had a crowded field with 19 candidates in 2016 on the Republican side. I mean, we couldn't even fit them on one stage. How are they going to put 55 people on the stage? We're going to have 3 different debates before to different tiers. I mean, look, it's hard to say who's going to emerge from the pack. It really depends on what direction the Democratic Party chooses to take. They're facing a problem, which is that the Obama coalition is broken up. That the Obama-Trump Democrats have come over to the Republican side, and we saw that in the midterms where they came out in huge numbers for the president this time around. And Democrats won on the backs of upper middle class Republican districts that went over to them. So ironically, you've got the country club Republicans voting Democrat and the working class Democrats voting Republican. There are 700 counties that went twice for Barack Obama. Donald Trump got a third of them in the last election. There are like 7 to 9 million Obama-Trump Democrats who voted for him. If they can't figure out a way to get those people back, they're not going to win. So they need to find somebody who can bring those people back into their coalition and challenge Donald Trump for them.
Well, Jessica, some people think that would be Beto O'Rourke, a 3-term congressman who just lost his Senate race. Well, listen, he raised $70 million in this fight to try to unseat Ted Cruz. He is said to intoxicate the younger voters. When he was approached by hard news outlet TMZ Friday, they do break some news. He said, quote, "I haven't made any decisions about anything." What do you think, Jessica?
It's interesting. I wouldn't say he intoxicated me, but I certainly did enjoy watching some of his town hall rallies, and I thought he gave some of the more spirited defenses and emotional defenses of liberal policies that I think certainly a Texas audience should hear. And he came within 3 percentage points of Ted Cruz when you saw Greg Abbott carrying by 10+ points in a lot of these districts. So he's obviously exciting, love the energy there, but I think really, in contrast to what Mark was saying here, it's not so much about where the Democratic Party is going, it's where Joe Biden is going. So Joe Biden will spend the next few months deciding if he wants to run. There's obviously new reports that he regretted not running in 2016. If he decides to get in there, I think a lot of people are going to clear out. And as you saw that number, he's well ahead of Bernie Sanders, 20 points ahead of him as the next most serious challenger for the Democratic nomination. So I really think it hinges on Joe Biden. But yeah, 2018 midterm still going on. We're still picking up seats. I don't know how we're already in this 2020 mess. But
and to Biden, Beto is getting comparisons to Biden's former running mate, former president Barack Obama. From Politico, they say this: Bernie and Warren, now they have competition, referring to Beto, saying it completely changes the game if Beto runs, and he should. He's Barack Obama, but white. And that came from an unnamed Democratic bundler. Sagar?
Yeah, that's right. That article also had an interesting line noting that it hasn't been since Abraham Lincoln that we haven't had somebody who's ascended to the highest office in the land without ever being elected to something in the first place. And that's part of the thing that I think that the president is most watching.
He's a congressman.
Well, yeah, so I'm sorry about that. But he's
counts for something.
Been watching, he's been watching what's happening here. And I talked to the president just last week when he was looking at the 2020 field, and he thinks that it's a complete lightweight field going into 2020, and he's really not worried about them, particularly Joe Biden, as Jessica had mentioned.
Okay, I want to make sure that we get all of you to react tonight to this breaking news from the Washington Post that says this new report says that first daughter and also presidential advisor Ivanka Trump, who's does official work on behalf of the administration, that she used her personal email to correspond about government issues. Austin Evers, who's the executive director of liberal watchdog group American Oversight, quoted in the Washington Post, says this: "There's the obvious hypocrisy that her father ran on the misuse of personal email as a central tenet of his campaign." Now, a spokesman for Ivanka's attorney and ethics counsel, Abby Lowell, says, listen, this is very different than the situation with Mrs. Clinton. Says, Ms. Trump did not create a private server in her house or office. No classified information was ever included. The account was never transferred to Trump Organization, and no emails were ever deleted. He's gone on to add also tonight, telling us, he says, listen, this was raised 14 months ago. She reviewed and verified her email use with White House counsel and explained the issue to congressional leaders. So, Mark, is this not new news? Is this much ado about nothing?
No, it's unforgivable. I mean, the fact is, look, it is very different from Hillary Clinton for the reasons that her lawyer stated, particularly the fact that there was no classified information involved on this. But I mean, was she not around for the 2016 campaign? Did she not? Was she not there when the Trump rallies people were saying lock her up, lock her up?
They still are.
You know, I mean, and her excuse was she wasn't briefed on. She didn't understand the rules. I mean, any American could have told you who was paying half attention to the 2016 election that we understand the rules are if you're in a high government position, you don't use your private emails.
And there's no allegation that she trafficked in any classified information.
No,
in
not
fact,
at
we're
all.
told what happened is in about 100 of these emails or less that somebody reached out to her from an official government position, reached out using her personal email, and she responded. So the vast majority of these were details of her work schedule or her travel that she shared with personal assistants and people who watched over her kids. But Jessica, is that going to get lost in the explanation for a lot of folks who see this headline?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I mean, Twitter is full of it, and the hypocrisy, obviously, of, what the 2016 election was predicated on and that what she and her husband went and knowingly did. I am a bit surprised that they created this domain in December 2016, which is what the Washington Post reports here. This wasn't like they were using their old Gmail accounts. They actually proactively went and created this.
But not a private server.
I understand that, and it wasn't in a bathroom and whatever else, but we're not here to relitigate Hillary's email server. This was an avoidable mistake for sure, but I thought Nate Silver this evening raised a really good...
I need to get Sagar in here just for a quick
read
final
Nate
word.
Silver's Twitter feed. Okay.
Is it, Sagar, unforced error by them?
Yeah, it absolutely is an unforced error. And if we had gone through the 2016 campaign and learned anything, it should be that you should use the utmost of caution whenever you're using emails in order to communicate for government business, regardless of whether that's classified or not. And I expect that Ivanka will be talking about this for several weeks to come, and it's going to aggravate the president quite a bit that this happened.
Yeah. Well, I just assume everyone's reading all my emails all the time anyway. Hello, NSA.
They probably are, yeah.
Okay, Mark, Jessica, and hospital, including the suspected gunman. Sources telling the local ABC station the first victim was a female doctor heading into work. She was shot in the parking lot, we're told, by her former fiancé. The gunman then kept shooting inside the hospital. We're told another hospital employee and a Chicago police officer were his two other victims. Well, the midterms are almost over, with runoffs and recounts and legal battles still in the pipeline. But for Hollywood, there is now damage to be done, namely over Georgia's economy. But even though she's still speaking out over her loss to Georgia Governor-elect Brian Kemp, Democrat Stacey Abrams is asking Hollywood to back off calls to boycott the state, saying jobs are at stake. Backed by popular demand, correspondent Trace Gallagher doing a 2 for us again tonight. Hi, Trace.
Hi, Shannon. Because of tax credits passed in 2005, Georgia has become one of the most popular film locations in the world, with a string of studios, post-production businesses, and some 450 productions last year alone. The state estimates the film industry generates nearly $10 billion a year in economic impact for Georgia. But now that Democrat Stacey Abrams has lost the governor's race to Republican Brian Kemp by 55,000 votes, Hollywood West is not happy with Hollywood South, and many in the entertainment industry are calling for a boycott of Georgia, accusing Kemp of using his position as Georgia Secretary of State to manipulate the vote. Liberal activist and actress Alyssa Milano tweeted, quoting, "Is the entertainment industry willing to support the economy of a totally corrupt state that suppresses democracy, where the winner isn't the best choice for the people, but the best schemer or crook?" Of course, Milano offered no evidence to back up her scathing tweet, but that did not stop other actors like Bradley Whitford and Ron Perlman from jumping on the boycott Georgia hashtag. It's also notable that some of Hollywood's heaviest hitters supported Abrams' campaign, including Oprah Winfrey, Steven Spielberg, and Meryl Streep. But now Stacey Abrams is calling on the would-be boycotters to slow the train, saying, quote, "The hardworking Georgians who serve on crews and make a living here are not to blame. I promise we will fight and we will win," a likely reference to her plan to challenge Governor-elect Kemp's victory in court. As for Kemp, he is also trying to tone down the rhetoric, reinforcing his support for the film tax credit. Finally, some Hollywood critics also went after Kemp for his support of a proposed religious freedom law in Georgia, where conservatives want additional protections for opponents of same-sex marriage. Kemp has said he would only support a very narrow version that mirrors federal law. Shannon.
Trace Gallagher, thank you very much. Asian markets tonight joining Wall Street and declining in early trading overseas after weaknesses in tech shares and worries about interest rates sent our markets plunging today. Apple was the main drag and taking the technology-heavy Nasdaq along with it. Concerns over iPhone demand and reports that Apple will be cutting production as a result pushed Apple stock down into bear market territory. Apple now joining the rest of the Silicon Valley giants called the FANGs. That includes Facebook, Apple, Amazon, Netflix, and Google, all losing 20% off recent highs. At Facebook, the social media giant's founder, Mark Zuckerberg, reportedly readying for war, adopting a new, aggressive leadership style that is not sitting well with other top executives. Here's Fox Business's Christina Parsonolovas.
Facebook is facing a mountain of problems. The social media giant came under fire after a damaging report from the New York Times about its top management. The report claims that Facebook ignored and concealed the full extent of Russia's use of the social network to meddle in the 2016 U.S. elections. Facebook's current crisis, along with nervousness about user growth, pushed the company's stock down nearly 5% on Monday. It's poised to close its third straight month in the red, which would mark its longest losing streak on record. Facebook founder Mark Zuckerberg admitted on a conference call last week that the company could have handled the Russia meddling a little bit differently.
I've said many times before that we were too slow to spot Russian interference, too slow to understand it, and too slow to get on top of it. And we certainly stumbled along the way. But to suggest that we weren't interested in knowing the truth, or that we wanted to hide what we knew, or that we tried to prevent investigations is simply untrue.
Now 2 senators and other Washington lawmakers are weighing in, suggesting Congress should impose new regulations to rein in Facebook. That is, if the social media company does not address concerns about privacy and the spread of misinformation. Back to you, Shannon.
Christina, thank you very much. California's wildfires still raging tonight as the death toll climbs. Hundreds are still missing. The fire is spurring an intense political debate. What could be causing an uptick in mega fires across the Golden State? We will debate that with a couple of experts after the break.
Is it possible that climate change is a real issue here?
Well, we'll be looking at everything. I mean, it is land management and it's